Thanks. On behalf of USAID's Justice for All program, I'd like to welcome all the participants today and thank you very much for joining us. Because this is an important discussion that we're going to have together with the National Agency on the Higher Education Quality Assurance, because we would like to talk about admission and other stuff. Unfortunately, Stephanie could not make it today because she didn't feel okay. So she's going to be replaced by senior advisor on access to the judicial profession and education, Angela Gilmore, whom you can see on the screen right now in front of you. And before we begin, I would like to outline the key objectives of today's meeting so that we are on the same page. First of all, we would like to present the ABA tools and their best practices regarding how those law schools are approved and accredited. We're going to discuss practices and tools used by the American Bar Association in terms of licensing and accreditation of law schools in Ukraine, and we will consider opportunities for further collaboration and opportunities to share best practices to enhance higher education quality. Before we actually start the topical part of it, I'd like to give the floor to Andriy Butenko, who's in charge of the National Agency for the Higher Education Quality Assurance. Please, over to you for the welcoming remarks. Thank you very much, Artem. Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. I would like to wish you a quiet day and let it be without air raid alerts and everything to make sure our meeting is smooth and productive. First of all, I'd like to share my words of sincere gratitude for organizing this event and thanks the project, the program of USAID. For us, this is extremely important. I mean, for the entire legal community and everybody else who takes care of the higher education quality in Ukraine. Presently, the national agency, which I represent today, has been actively working on updating this legal component and legal due diligence for accreditation purposes. We're now working on the guidelines to enhance higher education quality across schools. And a lot of you might be aware that there is a discussion going on about additional or specific requirements for certain specialties and professions, occupations, I mean, including the legal one. They're now discussing if there's any specific requirement that has to be implemented to accredit those law schools as compared to others. Hopefully, today's discussion is going to seed some of the ideas, and we will be listening about new approaches, opportunities from ABA that will help us enhance our higher education quality, especially for legal education, because it has to be always up to date. Education quality is something that never stops. You got to be working on it continuously. You can never be perfect because always there is something that you can do to enhance quality of our programming. Thank you so much for this opportunity on behalf of the entire educational and legal community. And Artem, thank you personally for having initiated this webinar. And thank you for moderating so many important events for us. So thanks for having us here. Thank you very much, Andrei. On behalf of our program, I'd like to extend my words of sincere gratitude to our colleagues from the American Bar Association and from the Legal Education and Admission section for their time they have dedicated. Thank you for sharing your experience in advance. And I'd like to actually inform you that upon request of the national agency, our program, with the approval that we received from ABA, we translated the standards in Ukrainian, and they are now included into our roundtable discussion today so that you can read them after. And today, Angela will introduce the general overview of the standards and best practices. She's going to tell what they're doing primarily, and you're going to have a chance to ask questions after the presentation. Thanks everyone for sharing your questions in advance. We've shared this with our American friends already, and you're going to have a chance to ask additional questions if you want to be able to get answers to the questions that you might be interested in. So not to waste any more time, I'd like to pass the floor over to Angela for the welcoming remarks and her presentation, actually. Thank you. Over to you, Angela.
Thank you. And hello from Chicago, Illinois. I bring you greetings from the American Bar Association.
Yeah, now it's good. Because earlier the sound was not clear. Now it's good. Thank you.
I am Angela Gilmore, and I am the Senior Accreditation Counsel with the American Bar Association. Stephanie Jiggins apologizes for not being able to be with you today, but she had a medical issue that she had to take care of. She is the Deputy Managing Director at the ABA, and I will be using the slides that she prepared for this presentation. So the title of this presentation is Introduction to the Accreditation Process. Next slide, please. And the Council of the American Bar Association section of legal education and admissions to the bar is recognized by the Department of Education as the accreditor of the JD degree in the United States. And the council's mission is to be a creative national force in providing leadership and services to those responsible for and those who benefit from a sound program of legal education and bar admissions, and provide a fair, effective, and efficient accrediting system for American law schools that promotes quality legal education. And as the accreditor for JD programs in the United States, the Council adopts and enforces standards, interpretations, and rules of procedure. And the Council also grants provisional and full approval to new law schools. The Council membership includes 21 voting members and then 2 non-voting delegates to the ABA House of Delegates. And the House of Delegates is the decision-making body for the entire American Bar Association. And as one of the sections of the American Bar Association, we have 2 delegates who represent our interests before that House of Delegates. On our council, the 21 members consist of no more than 10 law school academics. The council also has 1 current law student, 1 young lawyer, and 3 public members. The 3 public members are not lawyers or judges or members of the legal profession in any capacity. And the non-academics may be practitioners of law, or they may be judges in the US system. That is the council membership. And as part of our accreditation process, law schools that are accredited by the American Bar Association are inspected every 10 years. And we call that 10-year inspection a regular site review. And during the regular site review, schools are visited by a site visit team. And the site visit team is recruited by the staff. It consists of law professors. It may consist of judges. It may consist of other college or university administrators. And they visit the law school and they report on the facts, but they do not make any determinations about whether a school is in compliance with our accreditation standards or not. Rather, what they do is they review a form that is completed by every law school in advance of the visit, and we call that form the SEQ SRT, and that stands for Site Evaluation Questionnaire, Site Review Template. And that form consists of 83 questions, and each of those questions is aligned with one of our standards for the approval of law schools. So the school completes and submits that form, the 83 questions. The staff at the ABA review that form. They share it with the site visit team, and then the site visit team visits the school, makes its findings, submits a report that the school has an opportunity to respond to. So that's once the school is in fact accredited or approved by the council. Before that happens, however, a law school that wishes to be accredited by the American Bar Association must operate for 1 year. And then after operating for 1 year, they can apply for provisional approval. And during that period of provisional approval, they must go from substantial compliance with our standards to compliance with our standards. If schools want to make substantial changes to their programs or operations, they have to come back before the council. And every year, because the schools are only inspected every 10 years, every year the school must complete an annual questionnaire that allows the council to determine whether they are acting in compliance with the standards and providing the quality of education that's required. The next slide, please. In addition,
This is just a council mission slide.
Okay, if you could, I'm looking for the slide and it starts with 18 staff members. So, that looks right. So we have our council of the section of legal education, and those are the people who are charged with determining whether a school is in compliance with our standards, and they are supported by a staff. And the staff consists of 18 staff members. 6 of them have JD degrees. And the staff manages the accreditation process. The staff manages the site visits. The staff provides training for the site team members. The staff meets with the council during their council meetings, and those council meetings are held every 3 months. And during the council meetings, the council decides whether a school is in compliance with our standards and should therefore be reaccredited, or whether there are issues the schools must first address before the council can renew their accreditation. And the council reports to the U.S. Department of Education, and every 10 years, the council has to reapply for recognition as the accreditor for JD programs in the United States. Next slide, please. So I have mentioned the ABA standards and rules of procedure for approval of law schools. And in order to remain in compliance, to remain an accredited law school, the law schools must operate in compliance with each of the standards. And the standards are divided into 7 different chapters. And the next slide will show you the content of each of the chapters. And so the first chapter is about general purposes and practices. It basically explains the process that schools need to comply with to remain in compliance. Then we have Chapter 2, Organization and Administration. The third chapter is about the program of legal education, and that includes standards about the curriculum. It includes standards about distance education. It includes standards about experiential learning, regulations that schools must remain in compliance with. The fourth chapter is about the faculty, and it talks about the obligations of the faculty at a law school that is accredited. The fifth chapter is about admissions and student services, and included in that chapter are the standards that have to do with academic support, career development, the bar exam. And the sixth chapter, the standards address library and information resources. So it talks about the library collection, talks about the librarians and their credentials. And then the final chapter is about facilities, equipment, and technology, addresses the building, the classrooms, and the equipment and technology that are required in order to support the program of legal education. Next slide, please. So then in Chapter 21, we have standards that relate to law school governance. And so these standards talk about shared governance, which is the model that's required, governance that is shared by both the dean of the law school and the faculty of the law school. Standard 203 talks about the dean, the process with which a dean is named, and also Standard 204 talks about self-study. So the next slide focuses on Standard 201 and talks about some key items with respect to that law school governance. And so in subpart A, you see it talks about that shared governance between the dean and the faculty when determining the curriculum, when determining the students who are admitted to the law school, and with talking about the academic standards that those students have to attain in order to graduate from the law school. Subpart B talks about faculty and how members of the faculty are selected, and then the criteria for which faculty can be attained and can be promoted are determined by the dean and the faculty under the shared governance model. Some of our law schools, in fact, most of our law schools are a part of a university. We do have some standalone law schools, but of the 200 or so law schools that are currently accredited, fewer than 10% are standalone law schools. And law schools that are part of a university, while they are required to follow the requirements of their universities, they must remain in compliance with our standards, even if it means that they have to have policies that are separate from their university policies. Next slide, please. And Standard 203 talks about the dean. In U.S. law schools, the position of dean is a full-time position, and the standards require that that dean be provided with the authority and the support necessary to be the leader of the law school. In most law schools, the dean is also a member of the faculty, and the dean also has to have tenure, has to have security of position, so that the dean can make those tough decisions without fear of retaliation resulting in loss or diminution of job responsibilities. And then finally, and this is important for deans that are at law schools that are a part of a university, is that the faculty has to have meaningful involvement in the selection of the dean, that the university cannot, without having some sort of consultation with the faculty or representative body of the faculty, select the person who is going to be leading the law school. Next slide, please. And then finally, we have the standard 204 that talks about the self-study. And this is related to the site visits that law schools go through every year. In preparation, they have to prepare a self-study. And that self-study is comprised of the site evaluation questionnaire that I talked about earlier, and then also a law school assessment where the law school actually reflects on its mission, the things that it does well, and the things that it could improve upon. Next slide. Finances are very important for, of course, the successful operation of a law school. And so we have standard 202, which talks about the resources that a law school must have, financial resources, in order to remain in compliance with our standards. And so the next slide, please, talks about the resources that the law school must have available to it. And if you could also move to the next slide, which also talks about financial resources. But we want to make sure that it has the ability to operate in compliance with the standards and to carry out its program of legal education. Because in many instances, any difficulties that law schools are facing, be it in terms of recruitment of students, recruitment of faculty, can be fixed or helped substantially with suitable finances. Next slide, please. The next slide is about non-discrimination or diversity. And so there are 3 standards, and those are on the next 3 slides that deal with this. And so the first slide talks about non-discrimination in admissions and retention of students. It also talks about maintaining equality of opportunity for students, faculty, and staff without discrimination. And the next slide, the standards require schools to make concrete action to demonstrate their commitment to diversity and inclusion as well. Next slide, please, which is standard 301. So chapter 3 is about the program of legal education. And 301 says that that program of legal education has to be a rigorous program that prepares students for admission to the bar and to be effective, ethical, and responsible lawyers. And in doing so, the school has to establish and publish learning outcomes designed to achieve these outcomes. Currently, our standards just require law schools to have program learning outcomes, to actually publish what it is that their graduates will know and will be able to do as a result of completing the program of legal education. There is currently discussion about whether the standards should also require schools to establish, in addition to program learning outcomes, course learning outcomes, which would be a statement of what students will know and what skills they would possess after completing each of the courses in a law school's curriculum. The standards aren't particularly prescriptive with respect to the courses that a law school must offer, but there are some requirements. And so if you could move to the next slide, please. One of the few requirements regarding specific courses is that a law school has to have a course in professional responsibility. And that course has to award students at least 2 credit hours upon successful completion. And in the US, a credit hour requires basically 42.5 hours of work on the part of the student. And so that works out to be about 15 classroom hours per credit, plus 2 hours of out of class work that students have to perform in preparing for class, perhaps taking exams and otherwise learning that material under the direct instruction of the faculty member. So there is a requirement for a professional responsibility course. And then next slide, please. The standards also require students to earn 6 credits of experiential learning. And when we talk about our experiential learning courses, we are talking about simulation courses where students don't work with real clients, but rather they simulate the work that a lawyer would do under the supervision of a professor. Or the experiential credit could be a law clinic, which is basically a law firm or a legal services agency that operates as part of the law school and where they are supervised by attorneys who also have faculty appointments. Or that experiential learning could be a field placement where students actually go out and work with a law firm or some other sort of legal agency, but requires students to earn 6 credits in experiential learning before they can graduate. Next slide, please. A new requirement in our standards, and this requirement is actually effective with the class of students who started this fall, is in Standard 303. And law schools have to provide students with education on bias, cross-cultural competency, and racism, and then also have to provide students with opportunities for developing a professional identity, to give them an opportunity to reflect on what it means for them to be a lawyer. Next slide, please. And this slide sort of talks about what our experiential courses look like. They have to have a faculty component, a classroom component. They have to be supervised by a faculty member or a lawyer on site. And then they have to have the opportunity for feedback on their performance from the faculty member and give them an opportunity to perform some sort of a self-evaluation. A lot of times students are required to do journals that require them to reflect upon their experiences working with real clients. Next slide, please. Law schools have more and more, especially since the pandemic, begun to incorporate distance education courses into their curriculums. And now the standards allow students to earn up to 50% of the credits that are required for graduation through distance education courses. And the standards include provisions that make sure that their schools possess the technological capacity for these courses, and also to make sure that these are courses where there is still interaction between faculty and students. Next slide, please. The standards also talk about different kinds of academic standards that law schools must have. So they have to have standards about class attendance, what it means to be in good standing at the law school, an honor code or some sort of academic integrity policy, what students need to do in order to graduate successfully from the law school, and what would lead to dismissal from the law school. And in all of the standards that where an adverse action might result, we require the schools to provide their students with due process. The next slide is about the bar exam. And there is no standard that requires students to take a bar exam, but the standard does say to the law schools that the students who do take a bar exam must pass that bar exam within 2 years of their graduation at a rate of 75% of their class in order for the school to remain in compliance. And if students don't take the bar exam within that 2-year period, schools simply have to let the council know. Chapter 4, next slide, please, is about the faculty of the law school. And in Chapter 4, and the next 2 slides are about Chapter 4, talks about the size of the full-time faculty. There's no required size. There's no required student-faculty ratio. They just have to have a sufficient number of faculty. That faculty has to teach substantially all of the first year courses. Half of the credit hours offered by the law school. Faculty also must engage, in addition to teaching, scholarship, service, and academic advising. And Chapter 4 also requires schools to have a policy on academic freedom and on tenure. And this is a standard that's being looked at by the council to expand what is meant by an academic freedom policy and also to include freedom of expression. Next slide, please. Chapter 5 includes standards that relate to students. So admissions, we talked about bar passage, student loans, student support services, employment outcomes. So schools must assist their students and their professional development, and also provide them with assistance in finding careers after law school. There is no particular requirement that a certain number or a certain percentage of students be employed at the time of graduation or a year or 2 from graduation. But if more than 20% of the students are unemployed and looking for employment, then the council is going to want to have more information about that. And so if you can flip quickly through the next few slides that talk about admissions, bar passage, student loans. And we are especially concerned that students are graduating with a lot of debt, and we want to make sure that law schools are providing students with the information about the debt that students from their law schools graduate with, and also provide them with information about how not to be in default of those student loans and how to pay them back in a timely fashion. Again, there's a slide about student services. And then the next to the last slide in this presentation is about required disclosures. So as the accreditor, the council has 2 main functions: quality assurance. That is, we realize that students who graduate from our law schools are going to have clients, and they are going to be responsible for those clients' life, liberty, property. And so we want to make sure that when they graduate, they are prepared to handle those responsibilities. The other main role is consumer information, that law schools want prospective students and current students to know that the law school is complying with the ABA standards. And so we have what we call required standards that require disclosures that the law schools must post on their web pages. We also have an employment summary report that law schools must post so that potential students know their employment prospects after law school, and then also the bar passage for that law school. So prospective students know about bar passage. And then the final slide is about library facilities and technology. And I talked about this a bit earlier, but the council wants to make sure that the school has the appropriate library facilities and technology to carry out its program of legal education. And so with that, I will turn it back over to the facilitator for this event.
Супер, дуже дякую, пані Ангело.
Thank you so much, Angela. This was an amazing presentation and so much information was in it. So let me start the Q&A session. And I would like to ask our colleagues to please ask your questions. If there's anyone willing to start, please go ahead. And I'm going to ask our technical support to display everybody on the screen so that we can see all the colleagues here. Please. Thank you so much. So please, dear colleagues, questions, remarks, comments, whatever. I can see we're joined by Stephanie. Stephanie, hi. Thank you for joining us today. I hope you're doing much better now. So please, colleagues, your questions, if you want. Please, Alexander. Introduce yourself just briefly and ask your question. Good morning and good afternoon. Hi, dear colleagues, dear speakers. I do apologize because I cannot turn on my video. I'm going to be back home in a couple of minutes. My name is Alexander Tarmos. I'm the professor of criminal procedure department at the National Legal Academy. And I'm also the member of the Quality Assurance Council at our university. So I have a question. Maybe I didn't understand it quite right. So I wanted to specify one thing for myself. As far as I understand, one of the criteria is how successful students are in the bar exam. And at the same time, this exam is beyond the law school's mandate. It is a student who actually chooses to pass this exam, and they are free to choose whether they want to pass it or not. So it's not mandatory, is it? But at the same time, the Bar Association tries to keep everything under control. At least it needs to know whether students have passed this exam or not. How can a law school encourage students and influence these people to go and pass those exams, especially if they graduated and they're no longer in a study? So how can you encourage those students to go pass this bar exam? Thank you. Thank you so much, Alexander. Please, dear colleagues, if there's anyone willing to answer this one, Angela or Stephanie?
I will start, and then Stephanie, please jump in to add or correct anything that I have said. You are correct. In the U.S., most students enter law school because they want to be practicing attorneys. And I would say the vast majority of students take a bar exam after they graduate. Bar exams are administered by the state or the jurisdiction in which a prospective lawyer wants to practice. Most jurisdictions in the United States administer what is called the uniform bar exam. And that is an exam that is consistent for folks who are interested in who are taking a bar exam in most jurisdictions in the United States, but there are a handful of states that also that have their own bar exam that's administered by the Supreme Court in their country. What we do in our law schools is that we make sure that the students are prepared to take a bar exam and prepared to take a bar exam in any jurisdiction in the United States. And so the curriculum at law schools will include the courses that are tested most frequently on bar exams. More and more law schools, I would say the majority of law schools these days, have a bar preparation component as part of their law school curriculum. So while they are in law school, they are given the opportunity to take classes that are designed to help them pass the bar exam. And so I think that given the reason that most of our students attend law school and given the support that they are provided in law schools that will assist them with the bar exam, that it's not a problem then for students who decide to take a bar exam. And when we look at the school's bar passage rate, if they have students who decide not to take a bar exam, that is not held against them. There is no standard that says a certain percentage of your law students must take a bar exam. The standard just requires that of those students who take the bar exam, 75% of them must pass within 2 years of their graduation.
Супер, дуже дякую. Так, щоб це було більш наглядно, зрозуміло колегам.
Thank you. Just to make it more illustrative for our colleagues, this percentage, well, same roughly, if there are 20 students in a law school and 10 of them after graduation have chosen not to pass this exam for their admission to occupation, and the rest of the 10 others decided to pass it. So those 10 that decided to pass, they need to pass it successfully. At least 8 of them have to pass it to make this 75% requirement.
Yeah, so if 10 of the students do not take the bar exam, and then of the 10 of the students who do take the bar exam, if 8 of them pass the bar exam, that school, within 2 years of their graduation, that school has an 80% bar passage rate, and they are in compliance with the standard.
Супер, дякую дуже за уточнення. І у нас інше запитання, прошу, пане Олександр.
All right, thank you very much for specifying this. Alexander had another one. Go ahead, Alexander. Alexander Drozdov, because you had your hand raised. Yes, good morning, good afternoon, dear colleagues. Professor Drozdov, an expert of Legal Education Quality Assurance Council. First of all, allow me to thank you so much for this incredible presentation. It has been very informative. And in this regard, I have several questions. The first one is, maybe I didn't notice it, but how long would the accreditation or approval last for curriculum at law schools? And is there any ongoing monitoring that is performed at law schools? Sometimes law schools implement changes, and some of those changes may not work for the better. Sometimes they're no good, and the situation may deteriorate. Nobody has safeguards against this. Is there any early response mechanism in case something goes wrong? That's my first question. And my second question is about the engagement of professionals in teaching, because Angela has told something about it, but we would like to understand much better if you have any requirements about how you should engage professionals in teaching. And what's the share of real practitioners that are part of the faculty? And one more challenging question, though. I'd like to find out just for myself, if those practitioners are involved in teaching, what is their functions? Are those like guest teachers, or they are completely incorporated into the teaching process on a permanent full-time basis? Or this is just a part-time job? Because from our own experience, we know that unfortunately not always those practitioners have enough publications, have enough professional background. Well, the practitioner can do the best job in the world, but sometimes they don't want to teach at all. Thank you, Alexander, for so many questions. Please, dear colleagues, if you want to answer these ones.
Angela, I'm happy to take the first one, and I can let you talk about the faculty.
Okay, sounds good.
So hello, everyone. I'm Stephanie Jiggets. I apologize for not being here at the start. I did have a couple of medical issues that I just barely completed running from the hospital. So I'm doing fine, but I wanted to jump on and give Angela support and thank her for jumping in at the last minute. And if I understand your first question, I believe we review law schools every 10 years. And so they get a comprehensive review every 10 years. However, every year they have to complete an annual questionnaire. And so as part of that annual questionnaire, we have what we call interim monitoring. And interim monitoring will review a number of what we call triggers. So we look at things like finances, increase in enrollment, bar pass, and if they trigger any of the items that we are running through all 200 schools, then we look into it further. In most situations, if they trigger 2 or more of these triggers, we send them a letter. We ask them to tell us how they remain in compliance with the standards. So in addition to the 10-year review, we do have an annual review that we do. Every school has to complete an annual questionnaire, and we have some interim monitoring, some 16 triggers that we look at each year.
So about the faculty, at most U.S. law schools, there are full-time faculty members, and then there are part-time or adjunct faculty members. Our standards require that the full-time faculty teach substantially all of the first-year students, and we're going to quantify that. There is a proposal to quantify that to mean that full-time faculty have to teach 80% of the first-year students, and that's because that's the foundational year for the students. That's the year when students need the most access to their faculty outside of the classroom. And so we have a different standard for those professors, for our first year classes than we do for our upper level classes for years 2 and 3 of a typical full-time law school program. And then we also require full-time faculty to teach half of the credit hours offered at the law school. So 80% of the first year, and then 50% of the credit hours overall. So full-time faculty have generally been practitioners, and then at some point in their careers, they make the switch to legal education. And we have also proposed that full-time faculty receive regular training in pedagogy and also their subject matter so that they can remain up to date on both the skills that students need and also the knowledge that students need to be effective practitioners. So we have our full-time professors, and then most schools also make use of part-time or adjunct faculty. Part-time or adjunct faculty are generally practitioners or judges. And so they don't have the time or perhaps the desire to even be full-time members of the faculty. And they often teach the more specialized courses, the more skills-oriented courses. And so we may have someone who's a bankruptcy practitioner during the day come in and teach our students one class during the year, maybe in the evenings, about bankruptcy and the specialized skills and knowledge that bankruptcy practitioners need to have. And you're right, with the adjunct faculties, there's sometimes not the same level of oversight. Sometimes their practices are really demanding and they may have to, at the last minute, cancel class or reschedule class or send in a substitute to teach their classes. Law schools have their students do evaluations of the courses that are offered in the law school and courses that are offered by both their full-time faculty and their part-time faculty. If there are complaints about actually any member of the faculty, but if there are complaints about the adjunct professors not being available, if those complaints reach the level of the ABA, and they often do during that site visit, then the schools will be asked to provide important information about how those faculty members are living up to their professional responsibilities.
Дуже дякую. Дуже дякую, Стефані.
Thank you so much, Stephanie and Angela. I can see another raised hand. Vyacheslav, please. The floor is yours. Good afternoon, good morning, dear participants. Hello, Stephanie and Angela. I really admired the presentation. And can you please introduce yourself? Oh, yes, of course. Of course I can. I'm from the Penitentiary Service Academy. I heard that you look at compliance with all the criteria and requirements and standards. That is clear. But if you produce any recommendation, is that recommendation mandatory for a law school? Or this is just part of their independence, so they may either follow your recommendation or not? That's the first part of my question. And the second one is, how do you improve the evaluation methodology? And do your evaluation criteria change over time? And have you ever changed those in your practice? Thank you.
So I'm happy to address the last question because I'm not sure I follow the first one.
So I'll take the first one and then you can follow from that.
Okay, that's
So,
fine.
sort of once a recommendation reaches the level of a standard, then it becomes mandatory. And so there is a process that takes place before there is a new standard in our ABA standards for approval. And sort of during that process, there are committees, there's research that's done, there is input from all of the stakeholders. It goes before the ABA House of Delegates. But once it's no longer sort of a recommendation, but once it becomes a standard, then it is mandatory, and schools have to comply with it to remain approved or accredited.
And then in terms of reviewing the standards and making changes to them, every year we put out a call, what we call a call for comments, and it goes out to all our constituencies. So that includes all the law schools and other related affinity groups. And we ask of them whether they have any suggestions on standards that we should look at and change. They provide us with that information. In addition, we have a standards committee that's part of our council, and they are charged with looking at the standards every year and looking at those comments that come in from those constituencies, and then making a recommendation to the council in terms of what standards to look at and review or change for that coming year. In addition to that, we also ever so often get information from the U.S. Department of Education. They also change the regs, and the regulations that the U.S. Department of Education puts out are regulations that all accreditors in the U.S. must follow. So not just us in law school, but also medical, psychology, all the accreditors have to follow those regulations. And those changes to those regulations can require changes to our standards. So that too was looked at by the standards committee, and they will make recommendations to the council. And again, as Angela explained, it goes through this whole notice and comment process where we send it out, we get input, and then we finalize it. In addition to that, we also do an overall review of the standards, and that generally takes place every 10 years. There are times where we have referred to this as the comprehensive review of standards. This past review is just now completing itself, and we refer to it as a strategic review. So we strategically looked at the standards that we thought needed to be revised. Our standards committee was broken up into working groups. Those working groups came up with drafts. Angela was very involved in that. Those drafts are then presented to the council. They're sent out for notice and comment. Again, there's this whole process whenever we suggest a change to a standard that it has to go through.
Супер, дуже дякую, колеги. Прошу, будь ласка.
Super, thank you very much indeed. Any other questions? Any other business?
Я бачу запитання про-
I can see no more questions now. Oh, I can see one in the chat. Alexander Lasuk was asking, what could be the reasons for a student not to pass the bar exam within 2 years after graduation? What's the main reason or reasons? And what are the advantages for those who aced it? So why would they be encouraged to pass the exam?
So the bar exam is basically a pass-fail exam. And so each state or jurisdiction sets its own cut score. And then if you score just a point above the cut score, or if you score 50 points above the cut score, you've passed the bar exam. Some jurisdictions have sort of an award for the person who receives the highest score on the bar exam, but basically there's no difference between the score once it's a passing score. And there are probably any number of reasons that students don't pass bar exams, but I would say that when law schools admit their students, they look at the student's entire application, and they only admit those students that they believe are capable of passing the bar exam after going through their program of legal education.
And that is one of our standards that we have, that you can only admit students that are capable of passing the bar.
Дякую дуже. У мене тоді уточнююче запитання, якщо дозволите. А що...
I have one more specifying question. From your experience and from your opinion, what would encourage the future? What makes sure they pass this exam successfully? What makes the real difference between those who passed and those who didn't during their study?
That's a really interesting question.
Yeah.
There are a variety of law schools in the United States. And there are some law schools that accept students who have done exceptionally well in their undergraduate programs, and students who always do well on standardized exams. And those are students that you can be pretty confident that they're also going to do well on the bar exam. And there are other schools that we sometimes call access schools, or that we call opportunity schools. And they have a different mission for their law schools. And their mission is to provide opportunities for underserved and underrepresented populations. And so they may accept students who haven't always done well on standardized exams, and who may not have done as well in their undergraduate programs. Those schools tend to work especially hard to provide their students with the knowledge and skills that are going to be tested on the bar exam. Those schools tend to have the most rigorous curricula, and they also tend to have the most robust bar preparation programs. And those are schools that have shown success with those students. Those are schools that satisfy our standard with respect to the ultimate bar passage rate. But because that bar passage rate is 75%. That means that there could be 25% of their students who don't pass the bar exam within that time. And I would say that those schools, because of their different mission of opportunity and access, and because of their robust and rigorous programs of legal education, they believe that every student that they admit can succeed, but that's not always the case.
Дякую дуже.
Thank you ever so much for your answers. I can see one more question in the chat. So please, if you can answer this one. How would a regular working day for a professor look like? And how many classes per week or per month or per year each professor would have to accomplish? And how many roughly hours would that be per year or per whatever?
Before I joined the American Bar Association, I was a faculty member at a number of different law schools. And at all of the law schools where I was a member, faculty were generally responsible for teaching between 6 and 10 credits each semester. And so that worked out to between 2 and 3 classes each semester. Each of those classes would meet for, say, 1-hour sessions, 2, 3, or 4 times a week. And so in terms of just teaching, you would be in the classroom for 6 to 10 hours per week. Outside of the classroom, there are office hours. And so at the last institution I was with, we had 10 office hours per week when we would meet with students. There would also be at least 1 committee meeting each week with colleagues to talk about admissions or curriculum or faculty hiring. We were also responsible for engaging in scholarship. So also during our work week, we would do research, we would do writing, we would meet with our research assistants, maybe talk with colleagues about scholarly articles that we were working on. We were also required to engage in some service. So in addition to sitting on committees at the law school, maybe we would attend committee meetings at the university. We would be members of boards of different organizations and associations. So there would be those meetings and responsibilities that we would deal with. So I would say that having first practiced and then gone into legal education, that the work week was just as busy, if not busier, than the work week I experienced as a practitioner.
Дуже дякую за відповідь. І ще бачу
Thanks a lot for your answer. And I can see another one in the chat here. In your opinion, if you have this information somewhere, what would be roughly the share of your graduates in the United States that become practitioners in the private sector? And how many would go for public service? And additionally, one more specifying question from me, what is the share of graduates who would never go into the profession and go to do business or do something else, not in the law? Do you have any information like this? And if so, please share it with us.
Yeah, so we actually track that every year. We have employment outcomes that the law schools have to report to us every year. There's an employment questionnaire. If I can quickly kind of find the link on our website, I can post it in the chat, but all that information and data is on our website.
Супер, дякую дуже. Тоді чекатимемо на
Super,
лінк.
thank you so much. We're going to await the link from you. All right, here's another colleague of ours who's writing to us, Anastasia Krivonos. Unfortunately, she cannot raise her hand, but she has a question about accreditation. So please, Anastasia, the question is yours. Dear colleagues, hello everybody. Unfortunately, I don't have this raised hand function. It just disappeared. My name is Anastasia Krivonos. I am from the Institute of Legal Ideas think tank. So with the support of USAID, we've been implementing a project that has to do with curricular accreditation. So we in the first phase analyzed the regulatory framework, and then in the next phase we're going to be looking at how those curricula are implemented. And actually, that's why I had this question. I just saw that the information that you've shared with in the chat about the rule of procedure. So please tell us, your council, does your council do only accreditation? Is this the only body, or there are other bodies that are also accreditors?
Well, our council is recognized by the U.S. Department of Education as the accreditor for law schools in the United States. There are other regional accreditors throughout the U.S. that accredit universities. And for example, if a law school were to start a Master's of Law degree program, that would be a program that would need to be approved by the regional accreditor. We don't approve those programs. We don't have jurisdiction. We only look at those programs to see if they have any negative effect on the law degree program.
Дякую. І я ще тоді, якщо дозволите.
Thank you. And if you allow me to ask another one, I know we're a little bit late and this is overtime. We just have a couple of more minutes to answer some more questions. In the Ukrainian context, we have two major procedures. There is a licensing procedure that is done by the Ministry of Education. It's like your Department of Education on a federal level. And there is also a separate accreditation procedure for curricula. So licensing is for the law schools, for instance, and accreditation is for the programming, for curricula. How about the United States? Do you have both procedures, and do you have licensing procedure at all for universities or law schools on top of the accreditation that your section is doing? Thank you. If you can share more details about this.
Right. So in the U.S., the council accredits law schools. Each state has a different licensing division that would license the actual school itself to be able to provide that program of legal education. But we just accredit the law school, the program for the JD. And that in accrediting that program, we look at the curriculum. So that's part of our standards, and we look at the curriculum. There's not a separate body that actually focuses on curriculum.
Зрозуміло. І тоді
That is clear. Thank you very much. And one more specifying question. Could you please share a bit about the licensing requirements? What would those requirements be? What do you need to have and to do to receive the license, to obtain it?
Well, I'll start, and then I'll turn this one over to Angela as well to see if she might have something to add, since she has worked at the law schools. But most law schools require that the graduate from an ABA approved program. So that's why being accredited by the ABA is so important. But most of the jurisdictions have other requirements. There's there's ethical requirements that you have to meet, and all the states have set up their own, the state bars or the state Supreme Court set up their own requirements to be licensed in that state.
Stephanie, I'm sorry. I asked a bit of a different question. Maybe it's the translation issue. The question was about the licensing requirements, not for future attorneys, but for law schools as institutions, as you mentioned.
Right.
So are there any, licensing requirements for law schools apart from
The
standards of
accreditation.
approval?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
that
the
you
only thing
can
I'm
possibly
familiar
share.
with is just the fact that they need a license to operate in the state. And some law schools get that from a state board of education. Some are granted that authority by statute in that state. And some, it's a business license that you get from your local Secretary of State.
Understood. Thanks so much. Колеги, чи є ще якісь запитання?
Colleagues, any other questions, or we are going to say goodbye to our ABA colleagues? Please. I can hear none.
Пане Андрію?
Andre, did you want to ask something? Well, thank you very much, Artem, for giving me the floor again. Dear colleagues, on behalf of everybody here, to thank you so much, dear friends, dear colleagues. Thank you very much, Stephanie and Angela, for your precious time, for your energy, and for everything that you do, because higher education quality is extremely important, because this affects the quality of the judiciary, the quality of the society, and everything else. It's very influential. Well, we have a lot of room for improvement in Ukraine. So I would like to now ask you about one thing and offer something. Would you agree if, of course, Artem and his team and Justice for All supports the idea to have a meeting on another occasion or several occasions with the Ukrainian legal professionals? We could prepare several discussion questions. For instance, we're very interested in learning more about in-service training for the faculty, how they want to develop themselves. We had a discussion here in Ukraine, like, is it enough to be a really good lawyer, or you also need to have pedagogical skills? I think in today's discussion, we've received a lot of very useful information, and some of this information can really help us improve our accreditation framework and the overall training practice. Would you agree to have more meetings like this? Are you interested in general?
Yeah, I'm sure we can definitely follow up with Artem and see what further discussions we can arrange. In some instances, it may be, especially when you're looking at faculty issues, it may be better for you to meet with another group, and we can certainly connect you with them. But happy to help move this forward.
Супер, дуже дякую, колеги. І дякую ще раз всім учасникам за
Thanks very
вашу...
much, dear colleagues. Thank you for your attention, for your questions, and for your answers as well. I hope this event has shed some light to the practice in the United States. And thank you very much to our ABA speakers for being here with us, with hopes for more cooperation in the future. We will really appreciate if we have more opportunities to share experience about improving higher education quality in Ukraine. Thank you very much, dear colleagues. Have a great evening and the rest of the day. Our colleagues from the US, have a great day. Let us keep in touch and be safe.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much.
Дякую.